Computer. Perfect. So we are recording. Very well. So today is July 18th of 2018. This is our bi-weekly API Machinery SIG meeting for the Kubernetes project, and we are starting today. So we have an agenda with a number of interesting items. The first one is about CRDs, and I will defer that to Mehdi. Do you want me to open the?
Yes, please. So I extended the design deck last week. Just giving you guys a summary, then we can discuss details. So the summary is the design deck proposed that we use webhook for conversion, and this feature would be alpha and feature gated. I think that's summarize it. That's the two most important thing about it. And do you guys have? I think you guys commented on document and
there has been some active comments. It is a detailed doc. It is certainly worth reading for people who are interested in both using it and perhaps help developing it, if there such a person is out there. There is, I think, time to finish the review before we get to the feature freeze date. So that would mean we'd be able to pursue this as an alpha feature in 1.12 if I think Mehdi is going to be the primary implementer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to try to pursue it in alpha of 1.12, I think we can push forward and try to get that to happen. But it does mean that if people are interested in reviewing, get your comments in, and probably later this week it should transition into a pull request.
Sounds good. Just for reminder of everybody, when is the freeze date for 1.12?
Looking at the schedule, so they have a date where we have to know what features we are going to try to deliver, and that date, I believe, is July 31st, which means, obviously, in order for us to deliver it, we have to have a design. We have to more or less have agreed on the design. The API review, of course, will be up to the actual API approvers when the poll gets opened. But fundamental concerns about where things go should be discussed now, and there is a very detailed API that Mehdi's included inside of the design. And I have a date to the schedule. Dims is there. Hey, Dims. Yeah.
So David, do you think there's any controversial comment on the document that we should discuss here, or?
Yes, a couple stand out. So one, I want to make sure that we're level setting this as an alpha feature. We let the no conversion come in as beta because the implementation of it and the semantics around it were extremely simple. The implementation of semantics around this will not be as simple. So I think that this should come in as alpha. And then the other thing that stands out are prereqs or co-reqs, I suppose, around pruning and defaulting. So I think that it is very important for us to be able to ensure that the data that we're storing in etcd is clean when we have it. And that's what pruning is about. Pruning is about saying, is the data that I have and that I'm claiming as a V1 storage representation actually a V1 storage representation? And because of the work previously done by Nikita for the schema, we have a schema to be able to make those decisions. And Stefan has been actively working on how to use that to be able to prune incoming data similar to a normal API. Again, just to level set, when a normal resource request is made, the fields are pruned. Any unrecognized field is unconditionally and silently removed before any other intervening component sees it and before it is stored in etcd. And because CRDs should be consistent, I think they should do the same thing.
So David,
Yeah.
if you look at how people are using CRDs right now, and I've done that on GitHub, they overwhelmingly don't use validation. There's about 84% that, when I checked a while back, after validation had been introduced, that were not using validation. So users have shown that they like the convenience of what I would call dynamic typing, sort of the same way people like to use Python and JavaScript. So I think we have to keep that as an option for users. So we need to find a compromise where you can support validation and not.
I have a proposal in my document I will share for the second item in the agenda. The plan is to have an opt-out option, like just a field in the validation where you can say this subtree is not pruned. But this must be explicit. So what we are talking about, that we have validation including pruning by default, but you can opt out for a subtree, or even for the whole CRD, which is also fine.
So you're saying that in the future, let's say in the future, we want all CRDs to have some validation, but it might be one that just says, you know, the whole thing is a raw message.
This would be possible, yes.
A raw extension, whatever we call it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that is valid. I think I would also discourage people from doing it. So.
Sure.
It's also important to note that if the conversion is done by an external system, that external system has the ability to deal with unrecognized fields in a source version by dropping them when converting to a target version. So while I agree that I think we want to help people not get in trouble, the system responsible for conversion still has the power to make decisions about dropping fields the same way our native types do.
So there is only one comment there is, yes, they can do the pruning, but it would be at a different stage as what our standard types are doing. So I have a diagram at the end of the document that shows where things happens, and pruning is happening at the first step, even before defaulting and validation.
But it's the same place where we have it for native types. Native types have it when decoding, and we have a versioning decoder which does exactly that, and we can add pruning.
So Jordan's comment was not correct, I think. We don't call the conversion webhook if a conversion is not necessary. So if they create an object which is of the same type as a storage version, then the conversion webhook would not be called under this design. So there's no
would be a no op. That's true. Are we considering pruning on read as well, or only on write?
Also on read.
I see. The alternative there is like when you migrate storage versions, then you sort of touch everything. Also, if you have a controller that's setting status, it's going to update every object. So that's going to cause writes that will soon cause pruning, but it's not going to be synchronous.
And for standard types, we do pruning on read, yes. Because it's just a deserialization that does the pruning because they don't understand the field.
Yeah. As I recall, Stefan had a prototype pull that I looked at that looked like it handled both the read and the write case.
Yes. So the PR is there. It's ready for review, and it's completely clean. There's nothing special. It's decoding, versioning, decoder, nothing else.
Yeah. It's just because that's the way our API machinery works, so there is a spot to put it.
Yeah, it's a little unclear what should happen if you have existing data and the validation schema changes. If the next time you read that existing data, if the fields that got removed from the schema should be stripped, which means that what you're reading doesn't actually match what's in etcd. We technically the same thing would happen with our native types, but we don't have the ability to just drop fields from our native types.
We don't
like
choose to drop fields from the native types.
If we did, then they would get dropped from the response. Yeah.
That's correct, but then not the storage.
It kind of sounds like we don't have 100% principled way that we handle native types either. We just have what we evolved into.
Yeah, it's an artifact of the round tripping through actual typed structs. Like you can't round trip data that those structs can't represent.
And similar to Eric Toon's point, if those structs had chosen to, they could include, here's just a map of stuff.
Which we do for some types, actually.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, the danger in kind of preserving or accepting unknown data is that you have time bomb data at that point that becomes meaningful in a future version and means things that are invalid or things that are unsecure.
I agree those things are bad. I think we have to decide if that's a concern we want to handle at the CRD functionality level or at the operator kit / kube builder level.
Nah, because it's not that. It's every client that goes to create something level. So, we got away with adding some pieces to pods, init containers as annotations. Yes, it was a mistake. Fine. But that mistake was only possible because we did a very careful upgrade, at least in OpenShift, because we didn't allow any security context. Like we disallow certain kinds of security contexts. We had to check all of our data ahead of time because of the risk of time bomb data. So the fact that you don't write something that you don't expect is valuable. If someone wants to opt out, I'm willing to let them, but I think it should be an explicit, I don't want you to protect me. I think that was the only thing that, there's a lot in there. It's worth someone, if they're interested, going through and reading.
Okay, so the CAP needs to say a lot more about pruning, I think is the takeaway here.
Okay. Sounds good. The document is linked in the agenda, so for anybody interested, a lot of interesting conversations and discussions. Should we move to the second part of the agenda? We good? Okay, Stefan, do you need me to open anything?
No. So I have a half-finished document for that, which I just showed David for now, but I will share it the next days. It's about the first sentence, mix of schema and value validation. It was a shout out of Daniel in some comment where he was surprised that we validate values while doing the schema validation. So a value is something like a regex pattern, like in the example below. We check for 1 and 2 in this case. Those two things are mixed in an OpenAPI validation schema. So it's not a real schema, it's doing much more than a Golang struct. And this leads to certain strange semantics. So I have one example there where it's basically an OR, so logical OR, two properties or two schemas below property A can either be, so field A can either be 1 or 2, and in case of 1 we get D to default to 1, and in the second case where A matches 2 we get another default. And also the pruning will be different because B and C are specified. So in the first one there's B, in the second just C. Which means if you take an example, like the input I have there, A is 1, 2, it matches both patterns, and it has B and C. It's not clear which of the B and C you want to prune. and it's not clear which of the two defaults you want. So the essence of this is we have propositional logic inside of the Open API validation schema. So it's much more powerful than a Golang struct. In a Golang struct, basically we have what Open API also has, but without all those junctors, so without and, XOR, or, and not. And the proposal is about enforcing that you specify your schema in a complete way without those logical and or XOR and not.
So
And we can do pruning. I'm nearly finished. And we can do pruning and defaulting without going into this logical complexity, and do the complete validation in the normal validation step of the registry. Yeah, that's it. That's a summary.
So I have a question here. I see what you're trying to fix here. Yes, those are not good to have those any or and or things like that. But even in our APIs, we're thinking to add them to the Open API for things like int or string or things like that.
Yeah, so this does not include to use them, but the proposal is if you want to have a property A inside of such any of, you have to specify it as well outside of it. So basically, I just write it here. You have to put the properties here as well with the same. So also with A, with B, and with C, something like that.
The proposal is to actually disallow them, is just to make them clear that this ambiguity doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. So we allow them, and we validate according to them in the full validation. So we don't lose any exclusivity. We just enforce that we have also a skeleton, that's how I call it, which is complete enough, or it's complete for our pruning and for defaulting.
Looks good to me, and I'm looking forward to see the document.
Is there a reason that the skeleton must be provided by a human? It can't be inferred from what the human...
If you want to have defaults, I mean, you have to make a choice. We can, of course, derive it. I mean, we can derive one of them, of course, but we cannot decide whether B and C, yeah, there's ambiguity.
So in the example here, is there any skeleton that would make sense besides saying I could have properties A, B, C, or D? In the Ghost version of this, you would have to have A, B, C, and D as fields, right?
Yeah, exactly. In the Ghost struct, you have B and C, both of them. You cannot have one or the other.
So could we do the same here and say any property that's referenced in any of the propositions?
We could do that, but the next question comes when you have not. If you have not, what do you do? It's the same thing, maybe. So I have a couple of examples in the document where it's really not clear.
Okay.
And also, is it a problem with the defaulting, for example, for D here?
You have to choose. That's the point.
Choose, yeah.
I mean, we can define just use the first one and don't care about the not cases, something like that. One can do it as well, but the semantics become unexpected.
I would say this should be rejected because we don't know which default we should use for D.
Yeah, in this case, we could just reject defaults inside of a contour, inside of any of. Sure.
Even just in terms of using an API like this, I think it would be a really difficult API to use. Like the types of APIs that would require the same field to default different ways, conditional on other fields, I think would be problematic. I'm just thinking about other objects where we've tried to do like conditional defaulting and how that interacted with apply and updates and things where you bring in an object and we default a field based on another field, and then you update the original field and the default that was derived previously doesn't get changed. I'm not sure we want to make it super easy to construct APIs like that.
So if I understand right, Stefan is trying to solve the problem to support the ratcheting validation that Jordan proposed within CRDs. And so the schema needs to express like the OR of either the old, more permissive schema or the new, less permissive schema. Is that right?
I'm not sure I can follow completely. So ratcheting is related because it's complicated if you have negative subformulas like with a not and the XOR. So we also want only allow ratcheting below, not below XOR and not, so only below positive subformulas. So it's related, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, it came up in the context of that, but I don't think it is exactly that, Eric.
So what's the concrete example that's not related to ratcheting of where you need this? I'm missing the intuition for why it's needed.
To need what? The any off or what is it? Need what? I mean, there's an ambiguity.
What you're proposing.
To make the semantics understandable, because otherwise defaults can come from conditions. They depend on conditions we don't want, and you can express things which are far from possible in Golang types.
Is there a real type you're working on that you can share with us that motivated this?
I will share the document. I think there are some examples. Yes.
Okay, looking forward for the document. Mehdi?
So I was discussing this with Stefan actually last week, that we are doing stuff on CRD, different people, different companies, different groups, even different SIGs. I was thinking this is a good opportunity to have a work group or whatever we call it. It doesn't matter. What I want to get out of this is at least meet with the people that works on CRD once a week and discuss things that we are doing. And what I'm saying about what I mean by people working on CRDs is us and people, for example, in SIG CLI that works and that works on people that works on KubeBuilder, for example, or any other tooling for CRD. It's really beneficial to meet regularly at some project management stuff there, like what tasks we have, what we need to do, and does anybody needs review or things like that. We can add a Slack channel and a mailing list too if we found that helpful.
So I've seen a lot of activity on custom resource definitions. I have not seen a lot of activity in our code from non-API machinery people. Am I missing that?
One example is KubeBuilder. That is actually an interesting tool that helps us developing CRDs, and we actually even referenced it in the document, I guess, or I was thinking about it at least in the conversion, that we think that some tooling should be there to make, for example, webhooks easy for people to use.
I guess, do we feel like there isn't enough time to discuss it here? Right. So for instance, the apply working group that exists because that work has sort of a different sub focus. They have a lot to discuss. They have a separate feature branch. They are rapidly experimenting, prototyping, and trying to do that. I look at this. We're developing it in master. We are making fairly significant progress with the current approach of discussing here, creating alpha features, gating them, merging them into master, and we have graduated several from alpha to beta.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking is not adding that much to it, actually, just meeting with people that are working on it and make sure that everything is going as smooth as we want it to be. It's not about deciding on anything, actually. If you want to decide on anything, if you have a design doc, anything like that, we'll just bring it up to the SIG API machinery. It's just adding a little project management there. That's it. And
I-
it's just
And also more room for discussing those things. Basically what we did today, but often there is not much space in the meeting.
I think having a dedicated channel for the working group is positive. You know, the discussions in the general channel can be, noisy with other people asking questions and that. I don't see that bad.
yeah,
I
like,
have
is mostly I discuss with Jordan, for example, directly, or I
Right.
discuss with Stefan directly, or talk with Anthony here. So it would be nice if we have a channel of communication that even if I'm not sure if Anthony has a view on this, it would be nice if it's in that channel that Anthony can see it, and maybe he has some opinion.
do we have evidence that we have saturated the bandwidth of our existing modes of communication? Perhaps I'm simply unaware of it, but I had not seen that evidence.
So Mehdi talked to me about this the other day, and the main thing I was excited about was the idea of having a meeting regular where the top agenda item every time is, here's exactly the list of things we need to get to CRDGA by end of year. Here's the state of all of the things that are, that are in progress towards that. Here's the things that remain, right? This meeting isn't, I don't think, the venue where we would have that kind of focus.
We have not had that goal. So we have, if we have a goal, and to my knowledge, it has not explicitly been stated that we would like to get CRDs to GA by the end of the new year. So, and I'm assuming you're saying 2019 because in 2018 the answer is going to be no, I think, because you can't possibly make it from alpha to beta to GA with something that goes alpha in the middle of what is it, October, September. So yeah, if you'd like to try to make that a goal of API Machinery, we can try to talk about making that a goal. We can see what would need to go forward to do that, but I don't think that step one is to create a working group.
If we're talking about distinctions between working groups and sub-projects, I think CRDs could probably make sense as a sub-project of API Machinery. I mean, not everyone involved in API Machinery is working on that or interested in that, and that is an area with work to do and different features and priorities. So having a spot for indicating who are the people involved in this area, and I'm not sure what options we have for communication channels around sub-projects, whether it's channels or lists or whatever. Like that seems like it could be useful. I'm hesitant about adding lots of new standing meetings. So, but yeah, the comment about owning code. So this does seem contained to API Machinery with people who are affected by it and interested in it. So I think, like I said, a sub-project seems like a better fit to me than a working group.
So do you think meeting once a week will add is a lot?
Yes.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be mandatory, I guess.
It doesn't, yes.
So the other thing I'll say is that I like the sub-project idea. And if a lot of people are working on this, if we don't make it a sub-project, then you're going to get a small group of people working on it and no way for outside contributors to easily join that group. If we make it an official CRD sub-project of API Machinery with a list of people and a mailing list, then it gets easy to coordinate. It's easy for people who have issues with CRD to find the right people to contact. And once that group has been working for a little while, maybe we can let them work out what the right cadence is for them to meet and coordinate.
Yeah, in terms of organizing our particular projects, sure. There was an attempt to do that before. We have a lot of different sub areas already listed. We should go through Daniel's list. He may even have put it there.
So I don't know.
So I was hoping to get the meeting approved here, but it seems that people think it's a lot to meet once a week. But I would be less happy, but happy with the Slack channel list or mailing list. I just want to add some sort of organization here, because there are things that I may know or may not know about that going on CRDs, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that we're working on validation, we're working on proning, we're working on defaulting, we're working on, and who is working on those. I just want to make sure that happens.
Yeah, I mean, we do have labels for CRD related issues and polls. So adding those labels to anything related to that area would make sense if you wanted to kind of keep up with what was going on in the repo. As far as a mailing list, I kind of agree with David. There's actually very little traffic on the API Machinery mailing list as it is. And so starting CRD related threads on that list seems like it would be a good starting point. And that way people who are interested in them can follow those, and people who are not can mute them. And if it becomes overbearing how much traffic is on the API Machinery mailing list related to CRDs that most people don't care about, then maybe we could look into starting off a separate list. But I'd probably try to avoid fragmenting too early.
Okay, and what about the idea of a sub-project instead of working group? We want to explore that a little bit more.
I mean, the server CRDs are already listed on our community page as one of our sub-projects. One of many, but it's already listed.
Okay.
And Medi is actually in the list of linked donors.
Okay, so I think that's fair to see if we start using the API Machinery channels, and if we made a lot of noise, then we can start our new channels. I was thinking, at least for me, there are many times that I had something and I didn't post it to the Slack channel or mailing list because I thought not many people may be interested in that channel. But we can start doing that to see how much noise we'll add to the channels, those communication channels.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Janet, you want to present there or?
Yeah. I cannot present. Is someone presenting?
Yeah, let me stop sharing. Can you try now?
Do you need the permission to?
No.
Which one?
This instead of the desktop.
I'm not sure it works on Mac.
Let me make you co-host for today. You should be able to present now. Yeah, now we see it. Yes. There was an elephant, and now we see.
So hi everyone, as promised, I'm going to present the garbage collection proposal today, but today I'm going to, because there are a lot of discussions in the CAP already, so today I'm going to focus on the problems that I'm trying to solve and the existing problems of garbage collection in general that I observed, and also what's the next step for this CAP. So some background for garbage collection. Currently in Kubernetes, there are 3 flavors of garbage collection. And the first one is on the reference based. It's the generic garbage collection that everyone is familiar with. And then we have capacity based and TTL based. So I summarized them in a table. The first one is on a reference based. So any resource that has an owner in its metadata, they can be cleaned up with by generic garbage collector. And the way, what I mean by clean up is like, if your owner is deleted, then the garbage collector can enforce a cascading deletion by looking at the dependent owner references. And then we have capacity-based garbage collection. We have something called pod GC controller that will just look at all the pods, all the terminated pods, and then they'll, based on a preset capacity that's only controlled by a flag in controller manager. So only cluster admin can control the capacity. So by default, I think it's 225K. So once the number of terminated pods hit the limit, the pod GC controller will kill the pods, but users have no control of which pods are killed first or the capacity. And then another capacity-based garbage collection is the controller history resources that's created and managed by workload controllers. For example, deployment will use replica set as its controller history objects. And then you can say how many history I want to keep in this deployment, and then deployment controller will only keep the number of replica sets, and if the capacity exceeds, it will delete them. So it's controlled by the users can set that limit, but only the workload controller, the things that are controlled by workload controller can benefit from this. And the last one is TTL based. We have, so every event is created with a TTL set, and it's implemented with etcd TTL. And so I think by default, it's set by a flag in API server component. So also only the cluster admin can control that. And by default, it's an hour. So after an hour, after an event is created, it will be cleaned up. So the main problem that I see from these three types of garbage collection is that for capacity-based and the TTL-based, they're not generic. And you can see from their name because they're not called something like generic garbage collection. And also, they're not configurable by users because you can only set it with a component flag. The only cluster admin can control that. And if you want to change the number, you need to restart those components. And for capacity-based, what I mean is that especially for the pod GC controller, there's no fairness because you can have one namespace that creates lots of pods and the other namespace has only a few pods, but it may be affected by the other larger, the namespace with a lot of pods. And also it's not related to resource quota. And also you cannot delete for pod GC, you cannot delete the pods in the order of, for example, their termination time. You can only, the controller only deletes it in the order of creation time, and also it breaks jobs. And for event TTL, because it uses etcd and TTL, it doesn't respect things like finalizers. Another problem is that we've seen a pattern that I call immutable. So I'm not talking about that the resource cannot be mutated. I'm talking about the resource that users usually keep creating them, and they're short-lived, and users never update those resources. If they want to change something about the resource, they'll just create a new one. The example of this is are jobs or config maps or secrets. So for these type of resources, users need to keep track of whether they still need this resource or not, and they need to figure out how to clean them up. And if the users don't do this, it's very easy to overload the cluster and slow down the master. We've seen something like a small cluster with a small master VM, but with like 100K of old jobs that users probably don't even need, but because they never clean up those jobs, the XD and API server starts timing out. So you may think that, how about using owner reference? But because those jobs, if they are not created by core cron jobs, then they don't have any owners. If you don't have any owners, then owner reference won't help you with that. The last problem is that we cannot centralize the cleanup of multiple resources with owner references. What I mean is that, let's say you have a bunch of manifests and you want to deploy them into Kubernetes, and you want to specify the owner reference relationship in the manifest before you deploy them, so that you can easily clean them up without doing anything. You can just delete the root resource and have everything else be cleaned up with it. But you cannot do that today because owner UID is required in owner references, and you can only know the UID until you create a resource. So then users need to first create a bunch of things and then figure out the UIDs and then insert the owner references into each dependent resources. And even if you make UID optional, then you will hit the problem when you create the dependent before the owner, then your dependent might be killed prematurely. So that's
I have a question about this one before you move on. Do you mind?
Yeah.
So you described like using declarative manifests to create resources,
yeah,
and then not having a good way to clean them all up. Wouldn't it be possible to use the same manifest to delete the resources? It seems like creating several resources declaratively and then deleting a single root resource isn't symmetric. That's not how I see most people doing declarative management. They pass a complete manifest with several objects to create, and then they pass the same complete manifest with those objects to delete.
You mean I just delete all my manifests with something like kubectl delete -f?
Yes.
The whole folder?
Well, yeah. So you created this set of resources, and then you want to clean it up, and you delete it the same way you created it.
Yeah, you can do that, but some user may not want to delete all of the things that are in the folder. You may have not one tree, but several trees. Several roots.
Yeah, if we're talking about like declarative management, it seems a little strange to have declarative management with overlapping things. Like I have a manifest and you have a manifest, and there's a shared resource between our manifests. It's not generally going to work well if we're both sort of assuming creation, deletion, lifecycle ownership of the same things. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that you can pass a complete manifest to delete. So that's all.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, the goal of this proposal is not to solve all the problems that I mentioned, but I just want to call out those problems. And the main problem that I want to solve is to make it easy to clean up those frequently created short-lived resources. So the proposal needs to be generic, easy, and users can opt in or opt out. And I'm not going to make resource immutable or talk about things like undo, deletion, or resource quota. So an overview of this proposal is that I want to introduce a TTL mechanism, but the TTL is not the time, it's not set when you create something. It is set when you want to clean up things that are already either finished or not used by anyone. So, for example, after the job finishes, you set a TTL, for example, 5 minutes, then after it finished for 5 minutes, it will be cleaned up. And now I'll show you some user story. For example, with this proposal, when you create a job, the user can set a TTL to the job manifest, for example, an hour. And then 1 hour after the job finishes, it will be cleaned up. And then the user just deploys the job and they don't need to worry about it. And the reason that I allow users to set a TTL instead of just delete the job immediately is because that sometimes you need to observe the results from the job somewhere else. So users can set that time for them to observe the result and then clean up. And another use case is for config maps and secrets. When you create a config map, the users can set the TTL to something like 30 minutes, and then it can be cleaned up after it's not used by other resource. For example, it's not referenced in deployment template or pods or stateful sets, etc. And then the user can just deploy the applications, and then when the system observes that the config map or secrets is not used by any other resource, then they can wait for 30 minutes and then clean up. So I'm not going to talk about the details of the proposal today, but based on the feedback that I get, in general, to implement the config map secrets type of cleanup, which I will call it the usage reference cleanup. It will require the garbage collector to do a inverted link to those resources. So each resource will need to, so the garbage collector needs to find all the users of a resource. And on the contrary, for owner reference, all the owners are already known by the resource. So the usage reference will cause, will be more pervasive to the, will have more impact on the whole system. So we decided to separate it as a different cap and focusing on solving the first clean up finished object first, the use case first. So the next step is that I want to introduce a TTL controller that can clean up the finished jobs and completed pods. But I also want to tackle other things like custom resources that can also finish and can be cleaned up. And the use case of this TTL controllers is, for example, the Kubeflow jobs. They keep creating jobs and they want a better way to clean up those jobs. And for completed pods, things like Spark operator and like Jenkins that's using Kubernetes plugins, they will create pods that will complete, and sometimes they don't know how to clean up those pods. And if they can set a TTL to those things, it'll be useful for them. And I'm also thinking about making it general so that we can put a TTL in the metadata that all resource can set it instead of putting it in every resource spec. So if you are interested in this problem or you have feedback on the usage reference, you can go to the CAP to take a look. And the CAP is right here, number 2287 in community repo. And I also opened another design doc for the clean up the finished objects here, and you can link it from the CAP. I put it in the very bottom of the page. So that's all. Thanks. Any questions?
Okay.
So where do you plan to put the new controller?
The new controller will be a separate controller, not in the garbage collector.
But it will still be running in the Kube controller manager.
Yeah.
Will it run alongside the existing PodGC?
Yeah.
It does a different thing, right? So this controller isn't actually responsible for trying to chase links when a thing has already been deleted, which is what GC does. This would be a piece of a controller that is responsible for deciding to issue that delete, and then later GC would be used to apply the delete properly.
I meant the PodGC that sets a cap on the capacity.
I think I'd be happy to see the PodGC deleted someday. Janet laid out the reasons why it does not work very effectively, and it's been my experience that it rarely does what I want.
Okay. So for follow-ups, the CAP is linked here in the meeting agenda. So take a look, get into it, comment. And finally, we have Antoine here to give us an update on server-side apply and dry run.
Yep, so I'm talking on behalf of the apply working group. I want to give you an update on the status, what we've been doing and what we're trying to do next.
Can everybody listen on the call? Because he's on the other side of the table.
I'm all the way over there.
Can you hear Antoine okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we've been focusing on working on an end-to-end story that would work, and I'm happy to announce that we have this end-to-end story working now. So we are able to create or update an object using kubectl apply, sending to this new endpoint. It's actually not a new endpoint, it's a new content type on the patch endpoint. So you can create or apply an object on this endpoint. The last applied annotation is going to be inserted in the object. It's going to be merged and created and stored in etcd. So this is what we have today. We're not completely sure that we're going to keep the existing merge logic, which has been written by Phil a while ago. So we don't know if that's the merge logic we want to keep in the end. We have to handle different scenarios now, like first and root are not saving the intent. We want to save the intent for the mutating webhooks. And we don't have a force option for controllers, for example. So if you have a conflict, controllers are going to fail. We don't want that. We want controllers to be able to force. So we have a lot of things that we want to finish and that are not done. But we're excited about the progress. We still intend to merge the branch in master before 1.12. And on this, I would like to discuss, because we would like to do that as alpha for 1.12.
If you guys just got it working right now, that seems pretty aggressive. Jordan, you've been watching it more closely than I have. Were you expecting to try to merge this branch in at 1.12?
If it was alpha gated, I didn't know what the plans were, but it didn't look like the changes were particularly disruptive. So I don't
apply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jordan.
I'll go through and relook.
Yeah, so we're definitely, we have some time, I think, and we'll definitely create a pull request in a format that is sort of easy to review when we merge in master, right? We don't plan on skipping any of the review mechanism.
Dry run, which I associate with this. It's still moving forward, right? I've seen we got the API merged. You have a feature gate pull underway. We're just going to keep that updating this week, hoping to push that forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Priority right now, we're trying to finish dry run so we can move back to apply.
Okay.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Does the design still include saving multiple last applied states for different actors?
Yes.
Okay. Is that what's implemented now, or is that still future?
Sort of. We need to finish that.
In progress.
It's in progress,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Any other question for Antoine? We have 1 minute left. We used like the full hour today. It was a busy meeting. Anybody else has any other question related to this or something else? Very good. So in that case, that seems to be all. I thank everybody for attending the meeting today, and I will upload it today or tomorrow, and then send the link to everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Nothing's done.
Danny,
When is gonna
how do you tell what a condition